I'm delighted to welcome our panelists for the next body of work we want to share with you and for the next session. We've really tried to be thoughtful about the order in which we're sharing resources with you today. My dog agrees that we're doing a great job. And we started with some really strong leadership from Amy. We then wanted to think about, you know, what is the role of clinicians in this? Let's make sure our clinical colleagues don't get lost, but are active collaborators in bringing this forward. How do we get executive support, and how do we get the cover and resources needed to do this work, not sort of intentionally and with the highest quality? And then finally, how do we think about, or not finally, and now we're moving to this particular group. We're thinking about, you know, we don't start with a shiny object. We don't start with, you know, let's just test this tool out in our trial or in our clinic, but really thinking intentionally about, you know, measurement as the foundation of everything we do. And I love the title of this panel, Let's Get Fit for Purpose. So with that, let me stop sharing and allow Jean to walk through and just give folks a little bit of a glimpse of the measurement resources that this team put together. So welcome everyone on the measurement team. You guys did an absolutely phenomenal job of solving a pretty pressing problem. You know, how do we think about, you know, getting the measure right, making sure that in fact a digital approach is the right one. And let me do one thing here, just so the view is correct. Thank you for your patience. I'm really sorry, guys. Give me just 1 second so I can get this right. And then we'll launch back in. I want to make sure that we're able to see everyone on the panel. So let's do that. Jean, do you want to walk through, I'm sorry, I fumbled that. So if you could walk through the resources again, I want to make sure everyone has an opportunity to sort of showcase what we have on deck and what this group did. Really thinking about, there's not a single solution. It's not a one size fits all approach to getting the measurement foundation. There are lots of different contexts of use. There are lots of different ways that we can derive enormous value from using these digital clinical measures in medical product development. And what we really wanted to serve up to you and what this group inspired us to do was to dig in, and for all of these different use cases highlighted in this landscape, to create an action-oriented checklist for the field to dig into. So with that, let's actually dive in. Let's meet the experts behind this particular panel, and let's learn about sort of the impetus for sort of creating these resources and how the field can dive in. And Betsy, I want to come to you first if I can. If for folks who know, they know, but there are definitely people on the line, and perhaps our tech colleagues coming at this from a slightly different background, who may not be familiar with what it means to do measurement science, or where you might find a measurement scientist. So if you could introduce yourself and just say a few words about sort of the field of measurement science, one that's been around for a long time and one that we mustn't try and reinvent the wheel on.
Sure, thanks, Jen. I'll start with my introduction. I'm Betsy Tschosik. I'm the head of digital innovation in patient-centered outcomes research at Genentech. And I'd say measurement science really boils down to 3 things. First is determining what to measure, what's meaningful to measure from the patient's perspective. Second is ensuring that we're measuring it well. And third is making sense of the data and how we interpret the data and determine what is a meaningful change in the data. So in the digital world, our focus is more on the validation of the measure from a traditional outcomes research measurement science perspective, rather than the validation of the technology tool. So we really have to partner up to get the full validation picture for a tool and a digital measure combined. So a measurement scientist would be involved upfront in the process very early on in determining the meaningful aspect of health and the concept of interest. And it's knowing the right level of evidence to bring to make sure that we've documented that meaningful aspect of health and concept of interest to meet different stakeholder needs. So when we're going for a label claim, ensuring that we're having the right level of evidence for health authorities to know that we're measuring something that matters to patients. And then as a measurement scientist, I may take a step back during the verification steps. We may get a bit involved in the analytic validation steps. And And then it's really during clinical validations where our skill sets come into play. So we look at how the measure performs in the context of use in relation to other clinical assessments or patient-reported outcomes. And we estimate the amount of change in the measure that's considered meaningful to patients. I think probably the most important thing is the main, if I could leave one message with when a measurement scientist should be involved, would be to reach out to your measurement scientist teams early, because it's that piece around the meaningful aspect of health and the concept of interest that if it's not done right at the beginning, you can have beautiful validation data all along the way in terms of your verification and analytic validation and all of your clinical validation and psychometrics. But if you're not measuring something meaningful in the end, that's a really hard thing to try to go back and fix, and you lose a lot of time and money and effort. So the earlier that we can get involved, the better, so that we're there for that meaningful aspect of health piece.
Fantastic. So Betsy, you set us up really nicely there, and you've really got to the meat of the content in this particular dossier across those different contexts of use, really thinking about, what is, how do we identify clinical relevance? And then how do we do the clinical validation piece? That's where we're focusing here. That's what folks will find laid out to them in this extraordinary menu of checklists that I'm, really action-oriented tools, really proud of this group. And Pablo, I want to come to you because, the impetus for doing all of this, the suggestion that set us down this route was you've experienced in your work that we're taking a one-size-fits-all approach to the level of evidence needed to sort of embrace and deploy these tools. Tell us about how you're seeing that sort of play out in practice and how these resources may be helpful here.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, everyone. I'm the Senior Vice President of Digital Health at BlackThorn Therapeutics. We're a computational sciences company developing proprietary therapeutics focused on neurobehavioral disorders. So we need to see inside the brain, which is something that you really can't do with needles and things like that. My background in this space spans from 2006 when I started working at Pfizer, and our first digital app at the time was the Chantix smoking cessation companion app. And having worked in digital health since then, being at 3 or 4 different organizations and deploying digital solutions for clinical trials, providers, patients, what I've seen is that although there are regulatory guidelines around software validation, people working in those teams come from different places, different experiences. So everyone has an opinion on the respective approach that we need to take based on what they've done before. So it's a huge spectrum, right? From we don't need to do anything to we cannot move until we document it, right? And get it approved. So having that collective experience documented as we've done with this playbook can help teams move faster with an approach that's fit for purpose, right? You don't need to, build something super complex if it's not needed. So that's the approach that we took in the playbook, and I appreciate everybody's contributions in what we've built, hoping that we can speak a common language, right? It's been the theme of the morning or the evening across the forums.
Fantastic. Pablo, you started us exactly in the right direction. And Jordan, I just got a ping from you. I know you need to drop to go and deal with a bit of an emergency. Say a quick word to everyone on the line, introduce yourself, and then I know you have to drop, and I'm grateful for you being here at all today.
Thank you, Jen. So my name is Jordan Brayanov. I'm a digital strategy lead within Takeda's R&D and Data Sciences Institute. And my role is to help the teams bring in digital technologies within clinical trials. So I'm what I would consider myself as a measurements person, by background. And my foray into pharma in the last couple of years has taught me a lot about sort of some of the struggles that we're seeing when we try to bring in these technologies. And I'm grateful for the Digital Medicine Society, for Jen, and for all of you guys coming together in helping us sort of make sense of this space. I think, as in pharma as a whole, we're still struggling with understanding what can we use different measurements for and when. And I think sort of going back to what Amy Abernathy was saying earlier, like we need a common language, and that common language also needs to span the level of evidence that we need to bring in place for a specific purpose. I think we understand that quite well for a lot of different applications. We're just not there yet, I think, for the digital measures. But what we've done here, I think, in this group sets a good foundation, and I hope that we all start building off of it and to be successful.
Fantastic. Jordan, thanks for being with us today. I do know you have to drop, and Jean's going to drop the link to the measurement panel into the chat for everyone. So as we talk about this landscape, as we talk about all of these resources, they are available to you. Ieuan, let's come to you next if we can. We identified these 13 contexts of use that folks will be able to see as they open the dossier that Jean's dropping. And for each one, it's really interesting. We had the sort of question of, crikey, we're going to have to, address these 13 unique use cases. In some areas, we were able to find synergies and, in fact, very, very similar evidentiary requirements. And I wonder if you could talk to us about some of those examples. While we wanted to solve the problem that Pablo articulated around making sure evidence was fit for purpose, we also found some synergies. Tell us about that.
Absolutely, thanks, Jen. So, hi everybody, I'm Ieuan Clay. I'm Director of Market Innovation at Evidation. Currently working on our health programs on achievement, which is our condition-specific health engagement experiences. At the moment, really focused on heart failure. So before I answer your question, Jen, I would firstly, I think many other people have said, but again, huge thanks to you and Jean. I think you guys have done an absolutely fantastic job organizing and motivating us through this. And I think the results are there for everybody to see. And I really hope this is a resource for everyone out there trying to bring change and ultimately bring value for patients, because I think that's the main motivation for so many of us. To come back to your question, I think one thing that we really struck on and really resonated, I think, with a lot of us was that, really the bar is decision making. When we talk about fit for purpose, oftentimes we're trying to, draw some sort of conclusion. We're trying to take some kind of action based off those insights. And it doesn't really matter whether you're deciding someone is likely to respond. So, for example, defining inclusion criteria for enrichment, or deciding whether they are responding, i.e. sort of an efficacy measure. Both require a demonstration that a measure is fit for purpose. And although the specific experiments to validate such a measure may differ, the level of evidence and the framework for gathering that evidence are the same. And I think that is a beacon of hope for kind of people who are entering this field, relatively fresh, that yes, there are a huge number of applications of these approaches, but there is a thread that connects it. And there is now a community that's really going to support you in trying to, do what you're trying to do out there.
Fantastic. And Ieuan, I first of all, I really appreciate how you talk about sort of the importance of the community in all of this. And I love that, in addition to a tremendous dossier, this gives us an opportunity to talk about how we engage with our measurement science colleagues in all of this. Kate, I want to come to you to highlight, it might not be my favorite question. It might be the question I annoy everyone with in this context is what's the same and what's different, right? When we think about comparing this to sort of more traditional approaches to measurement, so on and so forth. We talked about where some of these, we may see synergies in the, or similarities in the evidence required. We also were a little bit surprised actually by areas where it might be quite different actually, when we think about what's the evidence that we want to have on deck, not just to be certain about how we're using it, but also from a strategic point of view as we think about evidence generation through the course of a trial.
Yeah, thanks, Jen. So first of all, hello, everyone. I'm Kate Lyden, Chief Science Officer at VivoSense, which is a technology company focusing on the science and analytics of using digital clinical measures in regulated trials as well as healthcare. I will say that I consider myself a recovering academic, and so I've spent most of my professional career doing team science where transparency and communication is paramount to success. And so participating in this tour, I know I'm a bit of an echo chamber here, but bringing together these very diverse voices has really been a privilege. I think we can't underscore enough what an accomplishment it is to bring together leaders in the industry in a pre-competitive space where really smart people are being really thoughtful about important issues and speaking transparently and productively. I really think that the efforts put forth in this tour will really propel the field in the coming months. So I'm excited to see how that transpires. And so thanks, Jen and Jean, for making this all happen. And thank you, rest of my sprint measurement team as well. So to get to your question, Jen, I think that, yeah, there are instances where the evidentiary requirements may be similar across what may seem like different contexts, but I think the important point here is that these contexts actually may not be that different in that scenario. So if we scratch beneath the surface, these contexts probably share similar properties or characteristics. But of course, as everyone has said, we can't take this one size fits all approach to digital clinical measures. And so there are absolutely instances where context will, dictate what we can do, can't do, what we should expect, shouldn't expect. I think that we need to think about it in terms of what is the intended use of our measure. And that can't be based on one factor solely. So it's more a collective group of factors that describes how we're going to use the measure. So things like, what is the endpoint definition or measure definition? How is it related to the meaningful aspects of health for that specific patient population? What's the positioning of that endpoint or measure within the trial? And what's the positioning of the trial within the larger drug development process? And so I think we really need to consider this from a holistic perspective. And so we have an example with secondary endpoint. So we might use a secondary endpoint as an efficacy endpoint in a pivotal trial. And so both analytical and clinical validity is required in this scenario, and the rigor of this evidence must be extremely high, because ultimately this endpoint will be used to contribute to regulatory decision-making. Versus in another scenario or a different context, we can use a secondary endpoint in an earlier phase trial, or even as a non-efficacy endpoint in a later phase trial. And so the intended use of this non-efficacy endpoint can range anywhere from just demonstrating proof of concept to gathering data to use for internal decision-making, things like collecting important information about the measurement characteristics of that specific measure in this specific patient population. And so in this example, we can accept that either or both analytical or clinical validity evidence bases aren't fully established across a diverse patient population, because the intended use of this secondary endpoint is actually to help build these constructs. And so clearly there's a difference in the types of validity that are needed when we have an efficacy endpoint versus when we have sort of these internal decision-making endpoints or early phase trial endpoints. But I think the take-home message, sort of as you said, is that depending on the context, it's not just the type of validity that evidence that may differ that's required. But I think we also need to realize that validity evidence isn't all created equally. And so it's important to consider what the evidence is, how those data were generated, and is that data sufficient to support your specific use case?
Kate, you've laid that out incredibly well. These are, what we've done now is we've really dove into the meat of it. We've dove into the science. We're really insisting on making sure we have a sufficient evidence base that we can trust these measures in a given context of use. And what I'm really proud that this group did, that each of you did, was create a resource that distills the complexity in what you were saying, Kate, and as you laid out so nicely, and those resources are there, those resources are available. As you look at the checklists for these different contexts, not only is it serving up to you what's the evidence you need and the level of evidence you need, but it links in the moment out to those resources so that you can educate yourself or share that with your teams as you do this work. So Kate, you laid that out so beautifully. Ariel, I'm going to, so first of all, I was so delighted to get to know you and to work with you on this project. And you know, going back to what Amy Abernathy was saying, keep it fun. You were fantastic. We definitely once or twice poked a little bit of fun at you for being our oncology expert on the line. Oh, do oncologists always think it's a little bit different? You were a very good sport, but it got us to a point where we really, really got the evidence right. So you were absolutely the linchpin for this. But, you know, you lead oncology research, you lead these teams. And when we look at our endpoints library, for example, we don't have a single oncology endpoint listed there. It feels like it's lagging behind a bit. Tell us about sort of why you think that's manifesting and how some of the resources we've put together in the playbook might be supportive.
Thanks so much, Jennifer and Jean. Hello, everyone. I am a board certified medical oncologist and senior medical director at Covance by Labcorp. And this journey has been an amazing learning experience, 100%. I was totally outside of my comfort zone when I joined this team. A lot of reading, a lot of side conversations to definitely organize my thoughts and bring the value that the team needs. So I'm thankful for all of you colleagues. Thank you so much. And basically the reason is because most of our trials do not have digital measures as endpoints. We definitely collect a lot of quality of life data from our patients through questionnaires, apps. Sometimes some specific trials, one of the ones that I am leading that have some Fitbit kind of collecting information as an exploratory, but we still do not basically understand what to do with that data. And although there are some other groups that started to look at different measures, for example, to understand better the functional status of the patient, because we still use a subjective questionnaire that we ask to the patient how the patient feels to make decisions. It does not totally make sense at this point. And other ones linking more to predict adverse event linked to specific therapies. So I think that it's not enough, and this collaboration blew my mind and definitely let me and my team understand that we need to think more about what to bring to the table in terms of digital measures. I think that the patient journey, it's the whole thing. As just Andy mentioned, is what happened when the patient is at home, what happened when the patient is not coming to our office or just doing some specific visits that we usually have for the oncology trials, where we see a piece of what is going on with those patients. And that is totally linked to the DCT deployment, the decentralized clinical trial, and trying to bring those trials to the patients, especially for oncology patients that have to spend a lot of time, maybe for a blood draw and a brief consult with the PI of the trial. So it's an exciting moment. I think that you have the other challenging of the flow of the data, because we will start to collect data, and we have to be so sensitive in terms of what we are looking for and work in close collaboration with IT. We are actually doing that with our decentralized clinical trial team. We released an ebook with first thoughts in terms of how to review the data flowing from devices into the DCT platform. So super excited. We are doing a lot of internal job across different therapeutic areas to bring more value to our patients and to see more digital measures in our futures oncology trials. Thank you so much all. Yeah.
Ariel, I love how you talked about sort of the learnings here. And I didn't know about the different demands, and we'll give you a little bit of slack here. You know, there are things that are different. Sometimes in oncology, you're relying on things that are predictive measures. And so that sort of changes the equation slightly. And we all learned from that. And that was incredibly powerful. So I think this underscores, you know, the entire culture of the work we did on the playbook, everything we try to do here at Dime. And who greater to learn from this morning than Amy about the importance of this as a little bit of secret sauce to getting this done. Betsy, there's a couple of things I want to do. I want to poll our audience, and I'll do that. I'm actually going to do that right now. I want to hear from folks on the line around how you are all planning to, or where you're working to develop these measures, where you're hoping to deploy them, where you particularly work and focus. It was a real... this was not how I thought this particular dossier would go. I thought that, we would tackle, there would probably be a checklist, but really passing out these 13 different contexts of use, including in the post-market, including for safety surveillance, was an audacious goal, and we achieved it. And I'm actually just looking at the results come in. I will take a second because there's a lot of options here. I will let people take the time to respond appropriately. But what I will share in just a second is we can see the use of these digital clinical measures across a variety of different settings, both in pharma and drug development, and also out in sort of everyday practice. So the work that this group did, and let me end this and share it back a little bit with the field. Hopefully everyone can see that. There's a really nice spread in the use of these digital measures. And so just to underscore, thank you to everyone on this team. We would not have been able to serve everyone on the line unless you did the hard work that you did. And actually, I'm just looking at the results, and the majority of folks on the line are actually working or aspiring to use these tools in pivotal trials to support labeling claims. That's the highest level of evidence. This is a community that is leading into this, and you've created resources that are really important. And Betsy, I'm going to come to you if I can. We started with you as we talked about, the need to embrace our measurement scientist colleagues. Amy, and a theme of all of this work, has been, we need to make sure everyone's at the table. We even talked about the learnings from the early days of PROs. How can, tell us the value proposition, right? Why is it so important to bring measurement scientists to the table? How will all of our efforts improve if we do it well?
Yeah, thank you, Jen. I think you raised a good point, kind of going back to the PRO world and seeing how measurement science has really evolved to bring lots of other measures forward as well. We found that those principles were applicable across clinical outcome assessments, performance outcomes, observer reported measures. And now bringing all that wealth of knowledge to the digital measure world, we're not really starting from scratch. I think a danger zone. So first I would say we can bring all that experience that we have, and that's highly applicable. It's great. There are things that are new that we have to add in and, make sure that we're aware of, the verification pieces, the analytic validation, all those other pieces that go along with it. And the data is a bit different. Clearly, there's more some contextual pieces about the data and what type of device it came from and all of that. But we're not starting from scratch. We've got a really good foundation to build on. I think the watch out that I was going to mention is that I think sometimes we might have even over-engineered the PRO world, where we were so focused on our dossier of evidence being really an overwhelming amount of evidence that sometimes people didn't want to work with their PRO colleagues because we would want this giant dossier. So I think really the focus of this work stream here on fit for purpose measurement is what's so important. And being able to recognize that a different level of evidence for different contexts of use is what we should be paying attention to. And that's why each of those checklists, recognizing that we can have slightly different levels of evidence, pulling on the expertise that we already have, but not over-engineering it.
Betsy, this is sort of your remarks there are so important, right? How can we be fit for purpose? It was the title of this panel. And I have to say, I think kudos to you and also Nicki Bush, who wasn't able to join us for this session. She'll be joining a little bit later, who is an important part of this was, none of this is dogma. We always need to be fit for purpose. And I think you guys being really open and honest about some of the missteps, even in the early days of PRO, imposing levels of evidence that might not have been fit for purpose. We learned from that. Pablo, you drew on that and sort of tasking us with this. And I think that characterizes exactly what we're trying to do here with these teams, having those transparent conversations driving forward. And also every time we get a lesson learned, we deploy that to make future state better. So Betsy, Pablo, Ieuan, Ariel, Kate, and also Nicki and Jordan, who aren't on the line right now, but were so important to this. Thank you for everything you did. These suites of checklists, how you integrated into those checklists, resources that folks can draw on to meet the needs of the evidence that's fit for purpose in a given context of use has been fantastic. The process was fun, the work was tremendous, and I look forward to continuing all of this with you. Thank you so much.